This conference will now be recorded.
All right, let me get this on presentation. So you guys are welcome to ask questions anytime, either in the chat box or just interrupt me. I don't mind. I am going to hide this GoToMeeting a little bit so I can actually see my screen. Um, so I was more than happy to be invited to talk about what we do. I love, obviously, archives and records. That's why I do this as my job. And I love any chance to talk to people about it, especially the people of the Archdiocese who may or may not be familiar with what we do. So I thought I would start today. Okay, come on. There we go. I'm going to give you a little bit about me, just because I find in these virtual presentations, we don't always get that human interaction that we sort of miss from in person. So I thought I'd give you a little bit about me, and then talk about the mission of our department, what kind of archive services we provide, what kind of records management services we provide. And then I have a specific slide where I threw in some youth ministry-ish specific records retention information as well as archival information. And then if we have time, I can actually walk us through our website, but it'll just depend on how much discussion we end up doing. So a little bit about me. As you can probably tell from me talking, I am not a native to Georgia. I grew up in Illinois. I actually grew up in the Diocese of Belleville, which is where Archbishop Gregory came from before he moved to Atlanta. So he was my bishop growing up as a kid. And the pictures you see at the bottom of the screen are sort of a fun tie-in in that I found, or a volunteer actually found me in the archives for Archbishop Gregory. So apparently I wrote him a congratulatory note when he became Bishop of the Diocese of Belleville. It was a third grade class project, um, and it was kept and it was in our archives. So he must have moved it here with him, which is kind of fun. But I did my undergrad in international business and German, and then went to graduate school for archives and records management, and have been doing this for 10, 12 years now. Um, I mostly worked in corporate archives before I came to the Archdiocese, and the Archdiocese itself, while it is a religious archive, is also very much corporate records. So you get the same similar types of records that you would at any company. Um, so it was more of brushing up on the religious records side of things that I had to do when I started here. So I started here in 2012 as the archivist, and then in 2017 took over as director. So I just had my 9-year anniversary last week. Um, so I've learned a lot from all of you, as well as from all of the everybody I run into. I end up learning more about what the Archdiocese does. Um, So our department specifically is the Office of Archives and Records. So we've had an archives department since 1992, which is not that long ago, considering the age of our diocese. We just never had anybody officially in charge of the archives. Technically, the chancellor is officially in charge of the archives per canon law. So in canon law, it says the chancellor is responsible for all records and historical, whether active or historical records for the Catholic Church in the diocese. Um, Usually most chancellors are not trained archivists, so they usually hire somebody to do that. So I would be the subject matter expert on archives. Um, and then we added the records management component in about 2008. So we haven't had records management for very long either. Um, the first, I think, 1 or 2 iterations of the retention schedule were not very thorough. The one we have now is not ideal either. It's a bit of a beast to work through, but it's what we have and what we have to work with at the moment. We can't sort of make the updates and changes we want because of litigation holds and whatnot. So we do the best we can. But anyway, our department is here to collect, preserve, and make available the permanent and official records of the Archdiocese. And that includes all the people, the parishioners, the parishes, schools, Catholic Charities, Catholic Foundation. We help out with their records as well. We just want to make sure that we have some place where you can document the history and the impact of Catholics in North Georgia, and that's what we're here to do. We want to make sure that with a strong retention schedule, that gives us a valuable and rich archives, because we don't want to have to wade through a bunch of junk to find the important things. And as everybody I'm sure knows, we create a lot of junk in our day-to-day lives. And a lot of that stuff is not important. The thank you, I will meet you at noon for lunch is not something I necessarily want to keep in the archives. But great photographs like the ones you see here are things I do want to keep. So the top photograph is from a March 16th, 1965 Civil Rights March in downtown Atlanta. And you can see sort of the priests in the background. They were from the St. Martin's Human Relations Council, who was very active in promoting racial justice in the 1960s. And they would travel around the diocese. The gentleman you see in the foreground is Martin Luther King Sr., aka Daddy King, who was part of that march as well. And then the photograph at the bottom is a couple of our priests last summer at the march for the Catholic March for Black Lives that they did last June or July. I can't remember the exact date. And so things like this are things we want to document. We want to make sure that we know the activities of what's going on in our church and across the diocese, not just here in Atlanta. So these are some of the archive services we provide. This applies to both parishes, schools, departments within the building. On the retention schedule, which I will go over in a little bit, you'll see anything that we want for the archives is marked as permanent. So when it's marked as permanent, it's something that we would be interested in collecting for the archives. So in non-COVID times, we usually do a lot of parish visits, and we'll go through records and help them weed out what can be shredded, what has to be retained for X number of years. And then we'll mark, sort of, if they let us take with the records of permanent significance. The archives for the Archdiocese is purpose-built to be an archive. So when they moved into this building in Smyrna, we have temperature and humidity control, we have fire suppression system, we have the rolling shelving units that maximize storage space. So we have the ideal conditions to preserve materials for long term, which obviously a lot of parishes and schools, well, none of the parishes and schools have, other than a fire safe cabinet, which is helpful for sacramental records and what we recommend for sacramental records. But our department does a lot of research requests. So if you're celebrating a parish history, or you have questions about something the diocese did in the past, we do those kinds of research questions, and we'll do the research and provide that for you. We haven't quite opened up the research room to have on-site visitors yet, just because of the whole COVID situation, but in post-COVID times or pre-COVID times, we do allow for on-site visitors as well. So if you want to do the research yourself, you can. So that's an option. And we do internal and external. So we have obviously our departments and parishes and schools, the people who work there and attend there, our priority, but we also get PhD researchers, people writing books on civil rights in Georgia, or a history of Archbishop Helenan, that kind of thing. We also do sacramental records information. So I will pull up the actual handbook on our website in a little bit, but we have a sacramental records handbook that gives a lot of the instructions on how to record sacraments, what to do, what not to do, how to make changes, etc. And that's probably most applicable to the person at your parish who records the sacramental data for your parish. But it can also be helpful. There's some helpful information in there if you deal with prepping people for sacraments, or collecting the paperwork for pre-sacrament. I can't think of the word I want.
Yeah, I'm going to interject for a second. Also,
sure.
What is supposed to be on certificates? So if you print, yes, or maybe you don't, but you're responsible for having someone print a certificate that you give to your confirmation kids, or for some of you DREs that are doing First Communion reconciliation, there are things that are supposed to be on the certificate, and that is in that handbook.
Yes.
And then the other thing I just want to make sure, because I have said this to people before, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, but up to the first where you say acquiring, accessing, processing, collections. But so if you start a new job, or you go into a new parish as the youth minister, or you suddenly get multiple responsibilities, and you have you're overwhelmed with the amount of paperwork that is there, or you've come into this office and there's boxes everywhere, I do believe Angelique and or some people from her department will come and help you go through that information to let you know what can get thrown out, what needs to be held, and then if there's anything permanent that she would need for archives. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So we are still catching up on parish. We haven't started parish visits back up yet, but we do offer that service. So I do have a document that will walk you through how to do it without me, because I needed to hand out something last year since we weren't comfortable traveling around. But we do offer that service. So we can definitely, if you have bunches of records and you have no idea what it is and you don't have time to sort of sit there and go through it all and refer back to retention schedules and whatnot, we do offer the assistance to help you, either to help you do that or to do it for you, and then it's just a matter of you maintaining it going forward. A lot of people, it's the same thing if you've watched like any of the organizing shows on Netflix or TV or whatever. It's the same concept as you cleaning out your closet. Like, it's much easier to pull everything out, start sorting it into piles of like things, and then deciding, okay, this stuff has to be kept for this long, this has to be kept for this long, this can be thrown out, this can go to the archives, etc. So we're happy to help with that. We have a backlog of about 10 parishes to start visiting once we return to doing parish visits, but we can definitely add you to the list. And you might already be on the list, depending if somebody else from your office requested assistance. A lot of times it's the parish business manager who reaches out, usually with financial records or sort of correspondence type thing, but we're happy to help with the ministry records as well. We can also help with, some of the other things we do are digitization assistance. So if you need to scan, you want to scan materials at your parish, or to get rid of paper and just keep digital, we can provide guidance on that. We also do genealogy research and other transcripts for closed schools, etc. A lot of those probably won't apply to you guys, but it's good to know sort of what we do so you can refer people to us. The photo here is the first cover of the Georgia Bulletin. So this is I think it's January 1963. And we actually there was a memo in the communique, I've lost track of time, I think 2 months ago, that we have all the 1963 through 1980 issues of the Georgia Bulletin available publicly online now. So if you want to do research, you can do so through the Digital Library of Georgia's Historic Newspaper Project. If you go to the Georgia Bulletin website and go to the Archives tab, there's a link direct to the page where you can search the old historical newspapers. So I've been working on that for a few years, which has been really gratifying to see that up there. So they're full text searchable. You can search all of the issues by keyword. The Diocese of Savannah also has their newspaper up there, so that's a great resource as well if you're doing historical research on Catholics in Georgia. Any questions on sort of the archive side of things? I don't know if I can see the chat box. Here we go. Okay. No?
Yeah, I'm monitoring the chat. I don't see any questions yet.
Thank you. Yeah, just give me a holler if you see a question.
Yes, I will.
I had to collapse it so I could actually see my screen, and then I can't see the chat box. All right. So some of the records management services that we offer, like Elaine said, we do these on-site or even a virtual records assessment visit. And that can go for physical paper records or your digital files on your shared drives. So we do have some documents on our website that are super helpful on the records management tab. including, guidelines for managing shared drives, file naming, conventions, standards, standard abbreviations for parishes, missions, schools. I think schools are on that list. Also standard names for the departments and the chancery, so with abbreviations, because, putting an entire parish name in a file name is not necessarily easy with the length of some of our parish names. So we do have official abbreviations, and that way it sort of eliminates confusion across the diocese if we all use the same abbreviations and whatnot. So we are here for any questions you have regarding retention of records. How do I get rid of records? What's the process? We do have a form you fill out to request permission to destroy records. Our department looks at it, the chancellor signs off on it, and then there's contact information for a shredding vendor. The shredding vendor on the records retention form only works in a certain area. They don't cover the entire diocese. So we do have another vendor that covers sort of the outskirts of the diocese if anybody needs that information as well. So if you're further away from Atlanta. We're here if you have any sort of any questions relating to records or process or sacraments or anything really. We have a wide variety of responsibilities that we do, and sort of a wide area of expertise. So if we don't know something, we usually know how to find the answer for you. That sort of comes from our archives and library training background. We're not afraid to say, I don't know the answer, but I can find it out for you. And I usually can contact either other people in the chancery office or my colleagues who work at other dioceses. We have a pretty tight-knit group to sort of collaboratively brainstorm solutions. So we get all kinds of weird questions. So your question is probably not weird, so don't feel bad asking. We also can do a records management training at your parish or for your department, however it works out. We're happy to do that. And we can sort of tailor it to your specific needs. This presentation here is mostly standard, what I give for a bunch of different things, but I've also added in youth ministry records. So I'm definitely happy to tailor it to what you need. So some of the things that I sort of pulled out sort of non-permanent records and permanent records that we were interested in and sort of brainstormed some of the things that I think you guys might find interesting. You're welcome to correct me if I'm wrong, but or provide not wrong, but like if I'm missing important records. Happy to take that into account. So some of the things I pulled out for non-permanent records, which would be records that have a disposition time. So at some point they're going to be destroyed. Field trip permission slips. If there has been no incident on the field trip, then it's a current year retention. If there was an incident, somebody has to go to the hospital or somebody falls, whatever, then it's 6 years after that insurance claim is settled, or whatever claim it might be is settled. So that's sort of a sliding scale. So it's not necessarily 6 years from the field trip, it's 6 years after the settlement. Hopefully somebody keeps you in the loop on when that gets settled. The permission to contact youth form is a current year retention that should be supplanted every year until the child is 18. So you should theoretically get a new one of those every single year when the child joins whatever ministry or program at your parish. You also have sign-in sheets. So we clarify here between sign-in sheets that are specific to Virtues training and then just regular sign-in sheets for other events. The Virtues training ones have to be kept for 3 years. The sign-in sheets for every other event is just as long as they're useful. So that's just for your records as long as you find those sign-in sheets to be helpful for your day-to-day work. Things like your annual medical release or your annual media release, those should be supplanted every year. And then the most recent one retained until the child is 20. And I know that's sort of a weird number. That's what the attorneys recommended based on giving the child some time frame to, when they're an adult, to retract the permission that their parents gave. So it's this weird convoluted formula that they gave us, and we just went with the easiest number. So as Elaine said, for our retention guidelines, we do consult canon law, state, and federal law to come up with these numbers. We don't just pull them out of a hat. A lot of the state and federal guidelines for retention are based off the state retention schedules. And those are usually based off of, oh, the word I wanted just went right out of my head, but they're the statute of limitations for certain civil or criminal cases. So that's how a lot of those retentions get sort of put together, is based on how long after something happens or XYZ can I sue somebody else. So we sort of pick the one that fits best. So if the state guidelines are more strict than the federal guidelines, then we pick the state guidelines. If the federal guidelines are more strict than the state ones, then we pick the federal guidelines, because we want to make sure that we're meeting the most time frame, basically. Any questions sort of about the retention of non-permanent records? I know this one usually gets the most discussion, and I can pull up the full retention schedule in a minute if that would be helpful as well, and show you where to find it, which could be helpful. And you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question in voice form as opposed to chat box if you want. Okay, some of the permanent records that we would potentially be interested in for the archives. So the archives itself has the permanent records are not mandatory per se. Some of them are listed as permanent on the retention schedule. They should be kept forever, ideally. So there is actually a document on our records management page of our department website that is records to save forever. So it's a cheat sheet of all the permanent records that we would be interested in for the archives. And you don't necessarily have to keep them at your parish. You're welcome to send them to our department if they're taking up space, and they're things we would be interested in preserving for your parish collection. So our department has collections for pretty much all of the parishes in the diocese. These collections are only as good as the materials the parish sends us. So sometimes we run into situations where a parish reaches out and they want to do a parish history, but nobody at their parish has sent us any records in a decade or more sometimes. So it's kind of hard to provide a parish history when we don't have all the records. So we do the best we can to proactively reach out to parishes and remind them to send us materials. Anytime we're at a parish physically, we try to, ask about different permanent records. Some parishes are more territorial than others about keeping those on site at the parish. But if they do want to keep them on site, then we'll give them recommendations for how to manage them on site. But we try to bring them into the archives whenever we can. That way there's one central repository for information. So the permanent records I have listed here are things that are listed as permanent on the records retention schedule. Now it's permanent, but doesn't necessarily mean everything for every category. So newsletters are great, or any kind of publications your ministry might do. Doesn't matter how often you send them, but if you can export them as a PDF and save them, we'll happily take digital records, or if you have them printed copies, we'll take those as well. Or event programs, the same with that. We take digital or paper, and the retention schedule reflects that. So we don't discriminate between format of information. Now, when it comes to things like photographs or audio-video materials, we don't want everything. because with the rise of digital cameras and cell phone cameras, you can take dozens or hundreds of pictures at an event, and we don't necessarily want hundreds of pictures for every single event at a parish or an organization. Really, we want some sort of representative sample, and that the number isn't really the important part, but it's more important that we know what the event is, what date it's from, and ideally the people in the photographs. That doesn't usually happen. So a lot of times we'll just get a pile of photographs, especially printed ones from parishes. And of course, sometimes there's an event listed and a date, but 99% of the time there's no people's names on there, which can be difficult, especially when you're talking youth ministry and you have some people who have signed a media release and allowed you to use their photographs and some people who have not. So with sort of photographs involving children, we tend to be very conservative. We'll still collect them, but we usually won't release photographs with children until a lot of time has passed. So, I mean, that's kind of the idea of an archives, in that we deal with a lot of historical stuff. So things we put on our Facebook page are usually much older. And it's weird these days to think that the 90s are more than 20 years ago at this point. So we don't really share anything newer than the 90s on our Facebook page. So we're sort of within that 20-year time frame that it doesn't affect children. But the same with audio video materials. So things like podcasts or event videos, we're happy to have that in the archives as well. And we do have ways to preserve digital materials long term. But we don't necessarily want every single video for every single event, especially if they're masses to celebrate different things. When you multiply, say, one mass by 100 parishes, we would end up with a lot of mass videos. So we try to take samplings from different parishes when we can. Any questions sort of on permanent materials?
I have a question. When you
Sure.
say event programs, does that mean like a confirmation program or first communion program?
Sure, it could. A lot of times those come in really handy, because it does happen occasionally where either a first communion or a confirmation, well, first communion's not quite, I'm not going to say not as important because that's not the right phrase, but first communion sacraments are not required to be kept in a register. So I'm less concerned about those, but especially confirmation programs, because sometimes something happens and either a kid's name gets left off the register, or even an entire confirmation class somehow doesn't get recorded in the register.
Mhm.
So those programs are a great way to back up who was at that confirmation and who received confirmation when we have to go recreate the record down the road.
Okay.
So yeah, we've definitely used those before to recreate sacramental records in a
Right. As
register.
long as they have the list of names.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean,
maybe
even if they don't have the list of names, it can be helpful because then we have, you know, the date and the person, like usually it will list the
celebrate.
priest who performed.
Yes.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly.
Got it.
Yeah, and they provide great context. So when you're also visual context. So when you're trying to, you know, put together a parish history, you know, a decade or 2 decades later, if all we have are documents, it kind of gets boring. So it's nice to have, you know, a program cover or, you know, photographs or these kinds of things that provide that 360 picture of what was going on at the parish at the time.
Okay. Great.
So I will see if this works. I was going to pull up the website if my internet will cooperate. So here is our department website. And you can find us under offices. We're just under the Archbishop's office, so we're second on the list alphabetically. That's why we put archives first in our department name. So you'll find tons of information on our website, and I don't mean that as just text information on the website, but also tons of documents on here that can probably answer a lot of your questions, although we don't mind if you reach out to us with questions. We do list sort of the high level categories of archival collections we have. So if you're a little bit curious about what we collect, we have a list of those top level categories. And we do have individual collection finding aids, what we call them finding aids in archives. They're basically an inventory of our boxes for all of our collections that have been processed. So processed meaning that somebody has gone through all of the boxes and organized the information. If you ask us about Archbishop Gregory right now, we don't, or Wilton Gregory, Archbishop Wilton Gregory, or Cardinal Gregory, I guess. We don't have his collection processed. So we have boxes and boxes of records, but it hasn't been organized at all. So our volunteers had started working on, we have a volunteer who comes in 1 day a week pre-pandemic, had started working on it in February of 2020 and got to the point where he'd pulled out all the boxes. So our big table in the actual archives office still has all of the boxes across the table. So it looks kind of a mess, but there's a order to the chaos. We know it's there. So if you ever ask us for information or you're looking to see what's in your parish collection, we can send you a list, a box listing of what we have for your parish. And that way you can sort of see if you want to learn more. We digitize on demand, meaning that if you can't come into the office to look through materials, we'll scan the applicable materials for you, and then we scan it at archival quality so that we only have to scan it once. And so we'll scan the records, send you digital copies via Dropbox, and then also keep those digital copies permanently within our collection. And we have collections for all of the bishops individually up through Donahue. And then all of our parishes. And we do have some school collections, but not as much because a lot of schools keep their sort of historical materials on site in their school library. But we do have some information, especially about our closed schools. So we do active transcript requests for closed schools, even though our last closed high school was in like 1968. We still get transcript requests for it. So we do have information on here about if you want to come do research in the archives, here's the paperwork for that. We also do have a timeline sort of up through 1900 that somebody did years ago, which can be helpful if you're sort of looking for the old history. We have an oral history program that page lists who we've interviewed. So if you want to sort of learn more or hear about their interview, we have transcripts for those as well as the full recordings. Just don't judge my questions. It's very weird to hear yourself in recordings after the fact. And so it took a long time to get comfortable hearing myself in those interviews. So the records management tab is the one that's going to have the most information for you. This is where almost all of our documents are listed. So all of our policies and forms, and then a bunch of guidelines. So the policies and forms section has our records policy, an archives transmittal form. So if you have permanent materials to transfer to us, you just fill in the blanks here and then you can contact us to arrange that transfer. The records disposition form is the one you use to request to destroy records once they've met your retention. And then the records retention schedule is here. It's a few pages, so it can be kind of difficult to weed through, but it's full text searchable, so you can Control F and go. I think field trip permission slips are right here, and sort of scroll through. And it's sort of departmentally, in a way, organized, but the education section, I think this is called, combines parochial and religious, so it can be very confusing. So don't hesitate to reach out with questions on that one. We have sort of cheat sheet. Actually, I've got one pulled up here. We have a cheat sheet for PSR type records, which includes sort of the permission slips and notifications and whatnot. So I can send this to Elaine as well if Elaine wants to share it with the PowerPoint presentation. And that way you
that'd be great. That
okay.
one slide you had for youth ministers, I thought was really good too. So thank you.
I pulled that from here. This gives you a little bit more context and sort of the description notes. And then also lets you know if you can use an electronic signature situation as opposed to ink signature. And let me pull this. There we go. Oops, I did that wrong. I'm using my laptop instead of my desktop. So it opens PDFs differently than my work desktop. So I accidentally just closed the internet. Okay, so offices, archives, and records. And then if you scroll down further on our records management section, we have a ton of other documents. So things like best practices for managing your shared drives, guidelines for file naming, guidelines for packing records or weeding records. So the guidelines for weeding records is great because it tells you which records you do not need permission to shred or destroy on it. And the guidelines for packing records are if you're packing up records for longer term storage, sort of the what not to do's of that. So like hanging folders don't belong in boxes. They end up compromising the structure of boxes and then they can collapse down the road. So things and tips like that. Standard names lists for offices and ministries or parishes and missions. And then that records to save forever document I mentioned at the end. And then our sacramental research page is where you can find the Sacramental Records Handbook. Now, this just got updated. It also tells you which records are in the archives, which sacramental books are in the archives, but that matters more for genealogy researchers than for you guys. So the Sacramental Records Handbook is available in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. It just got updated this year. I'm gonna see if this will open. Oh, hold on. My GoToMeeting is blocking my, there we go. It is also full text searchable, so you can Control F to find whatever you need. If you page down to the table of contents, you can sort of get an idea of the tons of information that are in here. So it's geared more towards people who record sacraments, but it can be helpful to pretty much anyone who works at a parish and deals with the sacramental process. It's just a matter of finding the section that applies to you. So probably the certificate section could be helpful, but also knowing the context of how it all works could be helpful. It is a really long document though, so I don't expect you to read the entire like 50 pages. But it's full text searchable and you can skip ahead to whatever you need. There's also a bunch of examples at the end and scenario type. We try to anticipate scenario questions. Let me scroll down here a bit. So we have sections on ownership and responsibility. So who's in charge of the records, what records are required, and how are they required. We try to throw in ParishSoft in here when we could. And Susan Shirley helped us sort of do that portion of things. We do talk about, recording sacraments and who's in charge of them. Confirmation certificates, sure. You can Control F. Oops. Sorry, the camera on my laptop is at the bottom of the screen, so I apologize for the hand shot there. Yeah. Still at baptisms. RCIA. Probably would have been faster if I just went back to the index because there's lots of mentions of confirmation. Here we go. So here's the confirmation section. And the certificate information is here. Sorry, I went right past it. So sort of the information that we want recorded in the register is similar to the information that is going to be on the certificate. So this types of data section is what you would refer to record the information, but also to produce the certificate. So you're going to want the legal names of the child. I just had this question come up. What if the parent uses a different name when they're baptized? We still always recommend putting at minimum the legal name that is on their birth certificate on the record. If they also go by a different name, you're welcome to add that to the record, but at least also include their legal name, because 20 years down the road when they're going to get married or whenever, it can get quite confusing if you don't have the right name on the record. Make sure to include their chosen confirmation name, whatever saint that is, the name of the father and the name of the mother. We usually recommend to include the maiden name for the mother, and then also their date and place of baptism, as well as their sponsor information, and then the date and place of the confirmation and the name of the priest or archbishop, depending on if he delegated as well. So it's pretty straightforward information. Does that sort of help answer what to put on a certificate? Let me pull up the chat box. We do definitely require, oh, sorry, go ahead.
That helps a lot. Just because we've historically just put the child's name and the date, and then our pastor signed it. But this got us all to thinking that maybe our certificates weren't everything that they needed to be.
Yeah, I've had some conversation. Oh, I can't talk this morning, Monday. I've had some conversations over the years with different people who do the actual sacramental records entry at different parishes, and a few of them have expressed interest in having a standardized certificate form across the diocese, but then other parishes I've gone to have said, oh, well, I love the one we use. We're never going to use something different. So we've sort of went back and forth on whether or not to include an example certificate in this updated version of the handbook, and then ultimately decided not to. We can make recommendations, but at minimum, I mean, obviously the name of the child and then the confirmation date and the priest name are at very, very minimum what should be on there. But usually what we recommend is that when you're issuing certificates, it should issue exactly what is in the register. So all of the information that is there.
So Angelique, hey, this is Heather from Holy Trinity. Just to clarify, I'm hearing that all of this information should be included on that certificate that we hand to the parents to, just so it matches the entries, correct?
Correct.
This
yes.
would be a new paradigm shift for us, but this is huge. Okay. It makes sense.
Yeah, there's let me see if
a template would be great.
We've gone back and forth about it, and maybe we'll get around
at least
to
the
doing
youth
that.
ministers or the parishes.
Okay. Let me see okay, hold on. Let me hide this box real quick. Page 13. Sorry, this is scrolling by real fast. I'm trying to pull up. The right page. Okay. So there is a general section under the first section, the general sort of sacramental records information. There is a section on certificates. And so it goes over what, like, sort of the do's and don'ts of issuing certificates. Who can request certificates, how you issue certificates. The actual, even though we use PariSoft, the actual register is the official record of the sacrament. And so that is the one you should at least double check with PariSoft before issuing a certificate. So I would never recommend issuing a certificate from PariSoft without double checking the register, because there's too much chance for something getting forgotten on the PariSoft record. Now, it's probably not as critical for First Communion or confirmation, but definitely for marriage, because they might not have updated with annulment information or whatever could be. We do have some information about format of certificates, so they should look official. You can create your own. You can use templates that you can buy from a store or online. Either is acceptable. We can discuss. I mean, we'll add that back to our list of doing some sort of template that people could use, and maybe have a variety of templates that you could download as a separate attachment if a parish wants them. Let's see. Yeah, there's a section on required data here. So it's supposed to include all data that's on a sacramental register entry, except anything that is confidential. That's good to know. Sadly, I don't use PariSoft on a daily basis, so I know they have templates built into PariSoft, but I've never actually seen them because I don't have a PariSoft account. So it's unfortunate that it's missing some of this information. I wonder if there's a way you can go into PariSoft, and I am showing page 15 of the handbook. I wonder if there's a page of, there's a way to go into PariSoft and change the default settings. It could just be that by default, they don't include some of these fields, but if you go into the template settings, you might be able to check boxes to include information.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Sure.
Whoever's doing your PariSoft knows how to do an IQ.
Mm-hmm.
You can get all that information out of the different portions of PariSoft to port it into a sacramental record. We do it frequently. We write a special query, and then it can print off whatever you want it to print off.
Excellent. So Susan Shirley would be the person to contact.
Right. She's who showed us how to do it. Or Carolina in that office is really good as well.
Yeah, their contact information should be on the website. I think it's Parish Services. Here we go. Parish Support Information Services is the section who can help you with PariSoft questions. So here's their contact page. You can find all of that information on the website, and they can do that. That's also a good solution. Mail merge from PariSoft into a Word document template. Yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of spending some time figuring out the different settings or the sort of quirks to get the right information out of a system, for sure. I think there was another question here. So if we discard catechetical class lists, which are OBS, we need to inform you via the appropriate form or just go ahead and shred. So OBS is obsolete, so it should go through, if it's listed on our retention schedule, we usually recommend that you request permission to shred the records. If it's listed on the guidelines for weeding records or is not listed on the records retention schedule, then usually you don't have to ask permission to do that. Since they're listed as obsolete, I would always err on the side of asking permission to discard of anything, especially catechetical class lists, because they probably contain contact information and sort of personally identifiable information. So we want to make sure that that gets disposed of appropriately. Let me see, hold on. Were there any other questions? I know we're at time or over time. I do have a little bit more time if people have questions. Anyone? I think we may be done.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put your email in the chat, Angelique, so
Sure.
everyone has that.
Yeah, I have a contact slide here as well.
Oh, good.
So you can contact our department via archives@archatl.com. You can also contact me directly. Either option is fine. Our archives email address goes to a ticketing system, so anyone in my department can respond to that. So we usually recommend doing the archives@archatl.com, just so you might run into a time where I'm not in the office and you want to respond sooner. But I also linked to our Facebook page. 2 years ago, we did an episode of Living History for the local religious TV station, and that's on YouTube. So you can learn more about our department and get a virtual tour of sorts. And then also our lovely nun dolls, if you haven't gotten a chance to check those out. Some information too. Anyone else have questions? I'm going to stop sharing my screen here.
Okay. Anyone? Yeah, so if you do have any questions, you can contact Archives or Angelique, or even if you're just wondering. I mean, there have been times when I've contacted Angelique and said, didn't we have a permission slip for something? And if she's got it, she will find it. So if you're ever wondering, you remember something that was in your parish. Now, the key is someone needs to have sent it to Archives in order for her to have it. But it's just, it was a very eye-opening experience for me when I met with Angelique and went through my training. I mean, even things like there's a specific way that we are supposed to organize our computer, like our Word documents and things like that. And it's really helpful when you have it in an organized way. And I know Angelique or anyone on her staff can even do a Zoom meeting and probably help you through that. So there's a big breadth to what that department does, and they're here to help, just like everyone here at the Chancery is here to support you all out at the parishes. So don't hesitate to ask us for the help.
Yeah, as I always say, we are not just the old stuff in the archives, because today's records are tomorrow's history. So if we don't actively work to capture today's records appropriately, we won't have anything to refer back to in 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
So
there'll be no old stuff.
right, exactly. There's going to be this digital black hole.
Yeah.
So thank you again for having me today. It was fun to talk to you all.
Thanks so much for being here. And if there's no other questions, so I will get the slides from Angelique, and I will get all of that out to you along with the chat notes. We will take this recording and put it on the ATL Youth page as well. So we'll just end with a glory be. So all glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week, and I will see you in a couple of weeks.